The banjo, the guitar's mountain-bound cousin. What images come to mind when you hear the nasally whine of a plucked banjo string? Maybe an older man, dressed in denim overalls with a straw hat, gently rocking on his favorite chair on the back porch of his house. Maybe it's just that kid from Deliverance. Or it's a rusty pickup truck racing down the road with some good old boys hollering in the back. No matter the image, there are two inescapable qualities. The sound is Southern, and its hymns are Christian. The banjo is inextricably connected to Southern gospel. It's the poster child of Appalachian spirituals. Where did this identity come from? How has the banjo carved out this identity and its place in Southern faith? To understand how the banjo is perceived today, we have to look at its origins in West Africa and its connection to the Atlantic slave trade. The akonting is the grandfather of the modern banjo. It uses 3 strings rather than the 5 of a modern banjo, and these strings would be stretched over a gourd covered with a tanned ox hide. A modern banjo is going to use a cow skin drum. The akonting is traditionally used by the Jolo people of West Africa in what would be modern-day Gambia, Senegal, and Guinea-Bissau. The instrument was used to play ritual songs as well as to tell stories and oral histories. Let's listen to Daniel Yada play a song written by his father on a traditional akonting. Make note of his downstroke playing style and the instrument's plucky similarities to older banjo tunes.
And it's called Gambia of Senegal.
The akonting would eventually make its way to the New World, as its players would be shipped off in chains to the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. As a way of preserving their culture and spiritual history, new akontings would be made by the enslaved Africans, so that the music of their people would continue to survive and that their children could hear their heritage. Over time, the instrument would eventually make its way to the North American South, where it would gain popularity with white slave owners. As African culture would more and more gain popularity with white audiences, the akonting would slowly be Europeanized, gaining an extra string, making it 4 instead of 3, and replacing the gourd resonator with a drum. These early banjos would be used in minstrel shows by white performers in blackface. The playing style would also be slightly changed from the traditional downstroke of akonting playing to a style known as claw hammer, where both the thumb and pointer finger are used each stroke. See if you can hear the beginnings of the upchuck noise synonymous with bluegrass music as Blaine Chappell plays the song Old Tar River on an 1845 minstrel-era banjo.
Way down in North Carolina, on the banks of the Old Tar River, I walked there from Alabama just to see my old Aunt Hannah.
In this period, as noted by historian Fred J. Hay in his article Black Musicians in Appalachia, an introduction to Affrilachian music, the perception of the banjo was moving away from being an African instrument to being a purely white instrument. The songs it underscored were no longer stories of African heritage and spirituality, Rather, they were becoming synonymous with the culture which had enslaved them. Albert J. Raboteau touches on how religion would interact with enslaved Africans. He notes how would-be missionaries to the slave had to prove that Christianity would make better slaves. This is part of a greater cultural push in the antebellum South to use Christianity as a way of enveloping and controlling slave culture. The growth of Christianity in slave populations and its emphasis on obedience towards masters is emblematic of how slave owners worked to eliminate the original culture and identity of their slaves and replace it with their own. This is not to say that white slave owners fully eliminated African culture and entirely appropriated the banjo. They merely believed that they had, when in reality, slaves were able to find, through burgeoning revival forms of Christianity, forms of worship using music and dance remarkably similar to what they would have experienced before enslavement. This is a critical point for the banjo and Southern religion as, with the growth of revival Christianity, with its emphasis on deeply personal spiritual awakenings and worship through song, that African culture would blend with American culture to create an entirely new fusion. In the same way that the banjo was born from the fusion of African and European instrumentation, so too would Southern gospel be the fusion of African and European musical styles. Hay puts it best saying, the supposedly most romantically Elizabethan and pure Anglo-idiom, which he identified as an independent invention of the good mountain folk was, in fact, learned through their contact with African Americans. Bluegrass is African music. Pearl Williams Jones describes the phenomenon of black gospel music as reflecting changes and retentions of West African musical style and context that can only be understood within a synthesis of social and cultural change. Now that we have had the opportunity to discuss the origins of banjo gospels, let's take a moment now to look at a few of the most iconic spirituals that are rooted in African American tradition. First, we have the song Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. Its original composer is unknown, and it was widely popularized through performances by the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Here is a rendition performed by Mr. Mike in a traditional two-finger style.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Well, I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
The song comes with clear themes of holy salvation and an emphasis on the glory that awaits in heaven. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Not only do the song's themes of salvation serve to reflect the themes of salvation found in Christianity, but it also emphasizes the desire for salvation from the trials and tribulations of slavery, as well as the greater social struggle which followed after emancipation. This song, again, shows how both Christian ideals and the reality of Black Americans in the 19th century merged together. The song that I believe best represents the burgeoning Black gospel in the South would be the myriad of bluegrass renditions of Amazing Grace. What shows the merging of old European Christianity with African American culture better than the mixing of a hymnal written in 1772 with the lively energy of the banjo? Let's listen to the rendition by Adam Lee Marcus. He will be performing with the 20th century three-finger Scruggs style. You will notice how the banjo seems to roll over notes in bursts of 3, and how it reaches a much faster tempo than the earlier songs. Yet again, we see a song focused on salvation, grace, and freedom from fear finding its way into Southern gospel. Now, the story I've been telling has not been fully complete. The way we approach the banjo and Southern gospel has changed over decades, and for a long time, the story only included white musicians. This self-fulfilling story made it so that the banjo is now seen as a white instrument and is used mostly by white musicians. In fact, all of the banjo players used in this project are white. It is only through looking back at the origins of banjo music and the slow acculturation of African music that the legacy of black musicians can be recognized. Deborah J. Thompson and Darren Hackard make note of this, saying that there is a lack of African people represented in the many folk festivals, jam sessions, recordings, and magazines who claim this music and currently play it or even listen to it. They explain this lack of representation as part of the historic and continuing discrimination and violence against African Americans in the United States. I do not want to add to this whitewashing of the banjo, so I would like to take a moment and play the music of Paul Lyon Sinclair, a black musician from the United Kingdom, to represent the long and diverse history of the banjo. Here is a piece titled Haunting Blues Banjo. Banjo and its music is a reflection of the tumultuous history of African culture in the American South. It is the encapsulation of centuries of acculturation and assimilation, and yet the music is still beautiful. Despite all of the dark moments in its history, the banjo also stands as a symbol of how two cultures can come together to make something truly unique. There is a quality of earnestness with the banjo and its spirituals that I do not believe can be found anywhere else. Its music is that of a people desperately trying to hold on to their tradition, identity, and faith. And I think in the end they succeeded, because even though the instrument has been whitewashed over the years, the songs are still sung and the memories carry on.